For a biologist living miles from any human, a knock on the door isn't a visitor. It's a question. A question with claws. The faint, rhythmic scratching began just before dawn, a whisper against the reinforced steel door of Dr. Aries Thorne's remote research cabin. The sound was alien to the deep wilderness she had cultivated around her, a sanctuary of silence broken only by the honest cries of the forest. Aries, a woman forged in the crucible of scientific rigor and personal loss, was already awake, her routine as precise as the atomic clock on her wrist. Her movements through the cabin were economical, a dance perfected over years of solitary dedication to her work on endemic flora. She moved from her small, immaculate kitchen, where the scent of brewing coffee mingled with the crisp, clean air filtering through the ventilation system, to her observation post, a small, heavily reinforced window that offered a glimpse of the pre-dawn mist clinging to the ancient trees. There, through the thick, bulletproof pane, she saw it, a small, impossibly vulnerable tiger cub, no bigger than a large house cat, its fur matted, its ribs stark beneath a tattered coat. Its eyes, wide and luminous even in the gloom, held a desperate intelligence. Aries felt the familiar tightening in her gut, a purely physiological response she had long since learned to compartmentalize. Her mind, sharp and analytical, immediately assessed its condition, likely orphaned, dehydrated, malnourished, perhaps injured. Her protocol, etched into her professional creed, screamed non-interference. This was the wild, untamed, and uncompromising. To intervene was to disrupt, to contaminate. She logged the event with her usual dispassionate precision, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. Subject 09. Estimated age, 4 to 6 months. Observed attempting to solicit entry to research outpost. Condition, poor. Adherence to non-interference protocol maintained. But as her gaze lingered on the cub, a fleeting image of its small, determined paw scratching at the unyielding metal, a flicker of something raw and unwelcome stirred beneath her disciplined exterior. She watched it turn, a shadow melting back into the encroaching mist, leaving her alone in a silence that now felt heavier, more profound than before. The next dawn, the scratching returned. And the next. It became a ritual, a soft, persistent drumbeat against the steel, a sound that began to infiltrate the carefully constructed silence of Aris's world. The cub, which she had mentally designated Subject 09 in her formal video logs for the Research Institute, was no longer a one-time anomaly. It was a recurring presence, its attempts at communication growing almost deliberate. In her clinical logs, she meticulously documented its dwindling energy, its increasingly gaunt frame, the slight limp in its left foreleg. Observed a measurable decrease in motor function, indicative of progressive debilitation, she narrated into the camera, her voice steady, devoid of inflection. But in the leather-bound journal she kept hidden beneath her bunk, the private thought she allowed herself to articulate in the dark hours, a different narrative began to unfold. He was here again. The visitor. I saw him shiver in the rain. Such small, desperate hope in those eyes. The words were a dangerous indulgence, a crack in the dam she had built around her emotions after the devastating failure of her last major research project, a meticulously planned reintroduction of an endangered species that had gone horribly, tragically wrong, leaving her with the bitter taste of responsibility and the absolute conviction that her work must remain pure, uncompromised by sentiment. Protocol was not a suggestion, it was a sanctuary against catastrophe. One evening, after a particularly fierce downpour had left the cub soaked and shivering at her door for hours, Aries found herself standing inches from the cold steel, her palm pressed against its surface. I know you're there, she whispered, the words barely audible, a fragile admission that transformed the dynamic from mere observation to an unexpected, dangerous relationship. The silence on the other side was her only reply, but the acknowledgement had been made. Then came the storm. A furious tempest that ripped through the valley, lashing rain against the cabin like flung stones and rattling the reinforced windows. The wind howled a primeval song, but beneath it, Aries could still hear the faint, desperate scratching. This time, it was different, weaker, more erratic. Through the blurring rain on her observation window, she caught a glimpse of Kale, his small body a pathetic heap, barely clinging to consciousness. A fresh, deep gash marred his flank, a crimson streak against his sodden fur. He was dying. Her internal debate raged, a tempest as fierce as the one outside. Her professional training, the ethics hammered into her by years of rigorous scientific discipline, screamed at her non-interference. The wild decides. This is natural selection. But a deeper, older part of her, a raw, compassionate instinct she had long suppressed, cried out. He is suffering. He is alone. She paced the small cabin, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The rules were written for a reason. They were written to prevent further pain, further contamination of a fragile ecosystem, further failure. She clenched her fists, her knuckles white. But they were not written for this. They were not written for a single, desperate life knocking at your door. In a decisive, almost reckless moment, she moved to the door. Her hands trembled as she unbolted the heavy locks, the metallic clang echoing unnaturally loud in the storm. A gust of wind, thick with the smell of wet earth and pine, tore into the cabin, bringing with it the scent of wildness and fear. And then, there he was, Cale, his eyes barely open, his small, emaciated body swaying. He stumbled forward, a silent plea in his exhausted collapse just inside the threshold. Ares reached out, her fingers brushing his soaked fur, a jolt of tender terror passing through her. The storm raged outside, a wild, untamed fury, but inside, a new, fragile world had just formed, sealed by the heavy bolt as it slid shut, locking the outside world away. The first days were a blur of clinical precision softened by an urgent, unfamiliar tenderness. Ares, the consummate biologist, applied her skills to Cale's small, broken body. She cleaned his wound, administered antibiotics, carefully measured out nutrient-rich gruel. Her movements, initially stiff and hesitant, became fluid, born of a growing necessity. He was not a pet, she reminded herself, even as his small, chuffing breaths filled the cabin's silence. He was a wild cohabitant, a temporary ward. Their relationship was one of mutual respect, not domestication. He watched her with intelligent, wary eyes, accepting her ministrations with a dignity that belied his vulnerability. Gradually, as Cale regained strength, small, significant vignettes began to stitch themselves into the fabric of their shared existence. He would rest his head near her boot as she worked at her desk, a low rumble in his throat, a nascent purr. One morning, he stretched languidly in a patch of sunlight, then allowed her to touch his head, his fur surprisingly soft beneath her fingers, without flinching. This was a relationship built on trust, painstakingly earned. Ares found herself talking to him, narrating her work aloud, sharing the quiet thoughts and observations she used to keep locked away. His presence was a silent, unjudging confidant, and as she nursed him back to health, she realized he was, in turn, healing her loneliness, mending the fractured pieces of her own isolated heart. One afternoon, as she was charting his progress, Cale rose slowly, walked to her, and nudged his head gently against her outstretched hand, a clear, conscious act of affection that shattered any remaining pretense of this being merely a scientific study. Months drifted into seasons, marked by Cale's astonishing growth. The small, desperate cub transformed into a powerful juvenile, his muscles rippling beneath a sleek, healthy coat. He was still Cale, playful and curious, but the raw power of a predator now resided within him. Their shared life settled into a rhythm, a secret world carved out of the wilderness. Ares would work at her holographic desk, the quiet hum of her systems a counterpoint to Cale's deep, contented snores by the crackling fire. They would walk the perimeter of the cabin together, Cale moving with a silent grace that belied his increasing size, Ares feeling a strange sense of belonging she hadn't known since childhood. She found herself laughing, a sound that had been absent from her life for too long, as Cale clumsily chased a leaf or pounced on her shadow. There was one perfect day, etched in her memory like a gilded photograph. The sun was warm, the air alive with the scent of pine. Cale, nearly full-grown now, chased a butterfly through a sun-dappled clearing, his powerful body moving with an effortless joy. Ares sat on a fallen log, watching him, a profound sense of peace settling over her. This was the heart of their relationship, a silent symphony of two souls, perfectly attuned. Yet, even in that perfect moment, subtle hints of the future began to surface. His playful swats, though still gentle, carried more force. His eyes, though still full of affection for her, would occasionally drift toward the deep, impassive forest with a wistful, almost yearning quality. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Ari stood with her hand resting on Cale's powerful shoulder, a perfect, impossible family silhouetted against a wilderness that would eventually, inevitably, reclaim him. The tranquil bubble shattered with the unexpected, jarring whir of helicopter blades approaching. Aries froze, the sound a physical blow. It was the quarterly supply drop, a routine check-in she had completely forgotten. Her colleague, Dr. Jen Lee, would be landing shortly. Cale, startled by the intrusion, let out a low growl, his hackles rising. "Cale, hide," Aries whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Now." She shoved him toward a hidden compartment beneath her sleeping platform, a space usually reserved for emergency supplies. He looked at her, confusion warring with instinct, but ultimately obeyed, his large body surprisingly agile as he squeezed into the cramped space. Aries then began a frantic, tension-filled dance of deception. She swept away stray tufts of ginger fur, kicked a large, half-eaten deer bone under her desk, and hastily inverted the enormous water bowl Cale used, wiping the damp patch from the floor. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, now felt like a stage for a perilous performance. The helicopter landed, its rotors slowly winding down, leaving a deafening silence. Jen's cheerful knock was a sudden, unwelcome sound. He stepped inside, carrying a crate of supplies, his eyes scanning the cabin with a casual professionalism. "Aries. All well, I trust?" "Any interesting observations?" he asked, oblivious to the frantic pounding of her heart. He chatted about institute updates, mentioning new regulations regarding predator habituation, the increased dangers of interfering with natural ecosystems, and a recent, tragic poaching incident upstream. Each word was a twist of the knife in Aris's gut, highlighting the impossible position she was in. He glanced at the overturned bowl. "Heavy drinker, are we, Aries?" he joked, and Aries forced a strained laugh. "Just hydrating," she managed. After what felt like an eternity, Jen left, the helicopter ascending, the sound fading into the distance. The cabin was silent once more, but it was a different silence now, no longer a sanctuary, but a cage, its walls suddenly suffocating. Aries looked at the hidden compartment where Cale was still breathing, deep and steady. She no longer saw just her companion, her friend, but a wild animal growing too large, too powerful for her human world. The chilling realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She was not protecting him, she was imprisoning him. The problem was no longer how to keep him, but how to let him go. Cale's adult instincts asserted themselves with increasing force, a wildness that vibrated beneath his sleek fur. He would stand at the observation window for hours, his powerful body thrumming with an energy the cabin could no longer contain. His gaze, once so focused on her, now yearned toward the deep forest, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scents of the untamed world. He would pace restlessly, a low growl occasionally rumbling in his chest, a sound of frustration and longing. Aries, consumed by a desperate urgency, spent her nights hunched over her holographic research system, a frantic ghost in the glow of data. She delved into rewilding programs, animal sanctuaries, anything that offered a glimmer of hope for Cale's future. The results were uniformly grim. Human-habituated predators rarely thrived in the wild, sanctuaries were overcrowded, often dangerous, and always a pale imitation of true freedom. Each option she uncovered felt like a potential death sentence. In a moment of agonizing clarity, she made an anonymous call to Dr. Anya Sharma, her former mentor, a woman renowned for her ethical conservation work. Posing her situation as a hypothetical scenario involving a rescued cub, Aries listened as Anya's calm, professional voice delivered the devastating truth: the kindest, albeit hardest, thing to do was to give him back to the wild, despite the immense risks of habituation. To keep him was to deny him his essential nature. Aries disconnected the call, the receiver feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. She watched Cale, now asleep by the cooling embers of the fire, his magnificent form a testament to the wild spirit she had nurtured. The core theme of their impossible bond finally verbalized itself in her weary, aching thoughts: to truly love something wild, you must honor its wildness above your own heart. She closed her research books with a quiet click, the sound resonating like a final decree. Her path, however heartbreaking, was now clear. She knew what she had to do. The agonizing process of taming Kale began. Each step was a small, deliberate act of grief. Aries, who had once offered gentle comfort, now maintained a careful distance. She stopped the evening grooming sessions, the low murmurs of reassurance she used to give him. Instead of feeding him directly, she began leaving food outside the cabin, encouraging him to forage, to rediscover the instincts she had inadvertently suppressed. She created physical and emotional space between them, a gradual, heartbreaking erosion of the routines they had so carefully built. It was a reverse parallel to the early days of their bond. Where she had once sought connection, she now sought separation, each calculated withdrawal a fresh wound in her own heart. Kale, sensing the shift, responded with confusion and a nascent hurt. He would look at her with questioning eyes, his chuffs softer, more hesitant. He'd try to nudge her hand, a familiar gesture that she now had to gently, firmly, refuse. His confusion made her task even more painful, each small act of rejection tearing at her resolve. The final night arrived, heavy with unspoken goodbyes. There was no training, no distance. Only a quiet, mournful communion. Aries sat on the floor, and Kale, sensing the profound shift, rested his magnificent head in her lap. She stroked his fur, murmuring soft words of love and regret, allowing herself one last, precious moment of closeness, committing every detail of his warmth, his scent, the rhythm of his breathing, to memory. Dawn broke, not with the usual anticipation of a shared day, but with the cold, clear light of an ending. Aries opened the cabin door, not to let him in, but to let him out for the last time. The longest walk began. Aries led Kale not along their usual perimeter path, but deeper into the ancient forest, towards the highest ridges, to the edge of the vast, untamed territory he must now claim as his own. The air was crisp, the scent of damp earth and pine needles sharp in her nostrils. Kale walked beside her, his strides powerful, his senses alert, yet he kept turning his head, his luminous eyes fixed on her. Her one-sided dialogue was a torrent of all the love and hope she held for him, a release of the unspoken words that had filled their silent existence. "You are strong, Kale," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You are ready. This is where you belong. You are free." It was a blessing and a dismissal, a gift wrapped in the agony of letting go. They reached a high clearing, overlooking an expanse of dense, unbroken wilderness stretching to the horizon. This was it. This was his world. Kale stopped, turning back to her fully, his body hesitant, unwilling to break the invisible tether that bound them. The bond between them was a visible, tangible thing, a shimmering cord of affection and trust. Aries swallowed, her throat tight. This was the hardest act of her life. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she slowly, deliberately, turned her back, walking away without a backward glance. It was an act of profound, selfless love, tearing her heart into 1,000 pieces with every step. She felt his gaze burning into her back, the silent question, the raw pain of separation. She did not stop. She did not look back. Her solitary walk back to the cabin was a desolate pilgrimage. Every rock, every tree, every rustle of leaves was a memory, a phantom limb aching with loss. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now loomed in the distance like an empty shell, its walls echoing with the ghost of a presence that would never return. The deafening sound of the cabin door closing behind her left her in a silence that was absolute and final. 1 year later, the seasons had cycled, bringing a new layer of green to the forest and a quiet transformation to Dr. Aries Thorne. She was still at her post, her research continuing, but she was different, her eyes held a deeper wisdom, a subtle openness that had not been there before. The rigid walls of her emotional containment had softened, replaced by a profound, resilient connection to the wild world around her. She never saw Kale again up close, not truly, but the wilderness offered her gifts, whispered assurances of his thriving existence. There were the unmistakable pug marks of a large, healthy male tiger near the perimeter of her territory, tracks too distinct to be any other. Once, she found the remains of a successful kill, a testament to his strength and prowess. And sometimes, carried on the crisp morning air, she would hear it, a distant, full-throated roar, a powerful declaration of territory. Each sign was a precious offering, a message across the vastness of the wild. Ari stood at her observation window at dawn, the same window through which she had first seen the desperate cub. She was not waiting for him. She was remembering. Her gaze swept across the misty expanse, a peaceful, grateful expression settling on her face as another, closer roar echoed through the valley, resonant and strong. She smiled, a profound, quiet acknowledgement. Love is not about holding on. It's about creating a space big enough for a soul to be free. Their bond had not ended, it had simply changed its form, an enduring, sacred connection woven into the very fabric of the wilderness. The sound of the distant roar faded, leaving Aries not with silence, but with the resonant peace of a promise kept.